purely because that makes it easier for me. And otherwise, we've just had a discussion about absolutely nothing for that I've recorded, and I don't think many people are going to want to listen to that life discussion. So I'm gonna start by saying on this episode that you and I think a lot of people are aware by now that you and I, Phil, we chat a lot anyway. And you are one of the most, probably one of the most useful resources of information that I know, not just in terms of Cervélo, but just generally with life, in all honesty. You're a man who knows.
I like to be thought of as useful.
You are very useful. And we have already recorded sort of Cervélo's internal podcast about the new R5. And you and I did this quite a while ago, in fact. It's probably over a month ago now, I reckon. And I had my R5 frame turn up probably 2 months ago, in fact, which I've had to keep quiet for a long time, which has been
which is tough. Yeah.
Really tough because it's an amazing looking bike. And then we previously did an episode talking through the Aspero 5 when that was launched. And I was really keen to do something the same for the R5 because the response from the one for the Aspero 5 was really, really positive. And I think that doing it for, what is probably, the R series or range of bikes in Cervélo's lineup is probably, one of the most iconic of the bikes that Cervélo's ever done, I would say, in terms of history and what's happened on it in the past. So it makes a lot of sense to really shout about a very, very cool new bike. And if anyone's listening to this, there's also a really good video of this available on YouTube where Phil is talking through this amazing presentation of this bike. But equally, we'll talk through everything as well as possible to explain what we're discussing through the terms of audio as well. But these first photos that are in front of us are all really damn awesome.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Cervélo, we don't rev bikes that often. It really, when there's a reason to change things, we'll kind of go back to the drawing board and clear things up. And so this bike has actually been cool because it's spanned 3 pro teams for us. We launched it with Dimension Data I guess we launched it in 17, but it was a 18 platform. And they were pretty successful on it. Tour Britain was one, or Tour Yorkshire was one on R5 with Serge Powell's, and certainly Sunweb wore this pretty well last year. It was kind of an oddball year, if you remember, all the way back to 2020, and what a strange sort of year we had where we had the tour at the end of the year and things canceled and started again. But they crushed it on this bike. They did really, really well. And then some of those riders, Dumoulin, Uman, moved across to Jumbo. And it meant that as we were kind of entering in this development phase with the R5 and trying to figure out what we could do better, we could continue that conversation, which was, and certainly at the start of the year, before we released started showing, I guess, the new R5 at Flesh Wallon, the team was using it to pretty good success as well. So it's kind of it's a bike that we've quietly had a lot of victories on. It's not, the classic road thing in the R5 is a bike that really is sort of this structure project with us, and it stays a little bit below the radar all the time, because we have those kind of oddball bikes like S5s and P5s and Caledonias and things that have a real kind of unique sort of characteristic, and they tend to muscle their way to the front all the time in terms of images and what people think of. But in the background, this R5 bike, has always been this bike that's pushing the limits on what we can do with structure, stiffness, weight, all those kind of things. So it's pretty exciting to get to the point where we're releasing another new one. That's just, again, is this next evolution of what's possible with this.
I think, as you're saying, it's a very much an evolution of the existing bike, and in a very successful way, where maybe at first glance you don't necessarily notice a difference,
Yeah, that's right.
And that's not a bad thing at all. That's not a bad thing at all. But there is a lot of difference with, as you say, the development of the bike, the structure, and the weights, and how it rides. It's changed quite a lot.
Yeah, and when you think about, if you have a single platform that changes radically every time you launch a new one, you question what the reasons are. That sounds like a style exercise. But if you kind of look back through the history of Cervélo, you see these kind of evolutions of something, whether it's aerodynamics or whether it's structure, and then every once in a while you'll get this kind of massive overhaul. But usually it's because it's a roll up of all the work that's being done in the background. So that transition, for example, around 2017, 2016, where we launched some new bikes that suddenly looked very different than anything we've done before. Maybe, not like a completely different bike, but certainly there's very visual cues that this is a different machine. All that engineering work that was being done in the background. So, the S5 disc, arrived with these giant tubes compared to what we'd done previously. And that's a result of the work that we did in the development of these R series bikes that launched in 2017. And that was work that was started in 60. But as we push ourselves to figure out what makes a better bike, it forces you to ask different questions, and I think that what we're presenting now with this R5 is really that work. It's when you start thinking more about how a bike rides and less about the math. Is it lighter? Is it stiffer? Is it more aero? And you say, how does this bike actually ride? Then you start looking for different solutions to those problems, because it changes the trajectory to a certain degree.
And as you say, we've already seen the new R5 quietly do very well in certain races, on certain stages, under certain riders. The first one that straight away comes to my head is Wout van Aert winning up on 2.
Absolutely. And that was one of the critical things. I mean, to backtrack a little bit, the challenge for us was trying to figure out how to move the existing R5 disc, the bike that's been in the market since 16, the ultralight category again. I mean, I think culturally we do this thing in the industry where we're always chasing weight. There's moments where you have to kind of walk away from it as a primary driving feature, because sometimes the quest for lightweight gets in the way of making a better bike. If you're still driven by that kind of like really baseline understanding of what makes a good bike, you're not really kind of moving the needle at all. So I think what we've done as an industry really successfully is we've taken weighted bikes, and then we pause right there and we make it better in some way. We make it stronger, we make it stiffer, we make it handle better, whatever it is. And we park there for a little while until we can do a bit more research. And then we drop the weight again, right? But spending those things that we do. So we've been on this really nice trajectory as we've kind of moved through the worlds of composite in the last 2 decades or whatever. And the bikes are getting better and better, and then we make them lighter, and then we go better again and light. And so it's all knowledge driven. It's all what we're learning as we go down that path. And the thing you're talking about is the challenge for us. This original the project goal with this version of R5, I'm sorry, was to make a bike that handles really well. So we were really focused on that ride quality thing we've talked about a couple of times previously. So we were really focused on stability and handling in a lightweight platform. So, when you see something like Wout van Aert winning, 2 times up the Von 2, but also winning sprints on the bike, and it's also descending really quickly. It's sort of what we really wanted to do, which was to make the R5 keep the handling the same, keep the stability the same. So it's a really capable bike, but again, just strip that weight out of the project. So, it's funny when we think about all the things that make a good bike, you've got to kind of think beyond just those things we started talking about when bikes were made out of 1-inch steel tubes, right? We were on this drive always for a lighter bike, those of us who are old and were there. And, a lighter bike was like 20 pounds, not 21, or 19, not 21.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about, 6.8 kilos, that you can sprint on, that you're strong, that are comfortable.
There's aerodynamics is brought into it. It's a much more of an all-rounder bike.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So again, and I stress the fact that this stuff comes out of changing the questions you're asking. Like you can ask a really simple question, which is how do you make it lighter? And there's 100 solutions for that, but that doesn't include how do you make it handle better and how do you make it stronger, right? That's a really kind of myopic view of how to improve something, just make it lighter. So the trick is to like figure out structurally how to get it lighter, but also manage all the other inputs, which are handling, comfort, aero, stiffness, that go along with that.
I love when I always thought the Dimension Data kit and bike always looked so slick together. It was so classy.
Yeah, that was a nice touch.
It was so good. The green on the bikes and the 2000, I guess you'd say 17 R5. That was the one that came out and was released in this this digital camo style print, which was released at Roubaix, if I remember correctly, because the print was inspired from Roubaix, which is this weekend, and I'm fucking excited about that as it is.
Yeah, I think we all are.
Yeah. It's going to be a wet one. That's it. That's all that matters. And seeing this bike then coming, this newer version of the R5 coming out and being, slowly teased in a very exciting colorway, very similar to the previous one, but being slowly teased out there. And we've seen it, at the Giro, at Flèche Wallonne, at the Tour de France, at the Vuelta. It's been really cool seeing how well it's done realistically without it actually being released.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, this bike was supposed to be released a long time ago, but to be perfectly honest, it's all rolled up in the supply chain mess that's dictating our global bicycle industry right now. I mean, it's not one of two things. It's just every touch point in the process of developing a bike right now is impacted negatively by what's going on. It's not a simple solution. So yeah, we wanted to release it a lot earlier, but then there was a point where we could have trickled a couple out, but that didn't really make a lot of sense. So we really wanted to make enough bikes that we could actually deliver them globally, so people could get a hold of them as soon as we're ready to launch.
Right. Makes complete sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So so what's going on with this bike? It's in a lot of ways, to talk about it, it requires like a little bit of thinking about what we did previously, what the goals were. And as I said, you and I have talked a lot about ride quality and this concept of affecting the thing that is tangible but not really quantifiable, I think is the way I word it. Because we know we can make something lighter, stiffer, aero. That's math. That's what it is. It's calculable, but we can't put numbers to a ride quality. That unique unique way we experience road input and rider input into the bike or through the bike is managed through a series of different things. I mean, you think about it, like you got two frame sets the same, but you have the same wheels, same tires, same cranks, all the touch points the same, and they're completely different bikes when you ride them. And that's that ride quality discussion. And when we tried to crack it open a few years ago, we really came to terms with there's three things that we can manage, like almost like an like a equalizer on a stereo or something, a tuner, that we can manage to affect ride quality. And it's the coming together of materials, so carbon, obviously, but layout, tube shape, manufacturing process, the way that impacts stiffness. Stiffness impacts handling. So handling we can affect with front trail, rear trail, bottom bracket drop, and head tube angle. That's easy enough to do. But it's also directly tied to stiffness, right? And so what you have is this situation where these relationships are kind of intertwined. Anytime you move one of those variables, change the stiffness, change the head tube angle, change the material, the layup, whatever it is, you're changing the way that that world is experienced through that mediator, which is the frame and fork that we're in control mostly. So, a lot of this discussion leading into these bikes that we were building and that we were releasing in 2015, 2016, 2017, we were starting to think about this. We were starting to think about how do we affect the way a bike handles? Because if you look prior to that, and we weren't alone in this, but a lot of bikes had a 68 mil bottom bracket drop, regardless of the size. They probably had 55 to 56 mil trail, 73-degree head tube angle, cha-cha-cha, it goes on, same bike. So we started playing with handling during the C series stuff where we went in and out on a limb and we really went, really far with building a super stable bike. I mean, you had, when you speak the C series language.
I'm debating trying to get hold of a second one now, as you know.
Yeah.
That bike is so good.
It is. It's just, it was where we learned so much about how to affect stability in a bike, and so it's hard to believe, but the R5s and R3s that came out in 17 were a direct descendant of the C series, we started understanding trail more. We understood bottom bracket drop more. We understood, how to position the rider on a bike differently, like all those things. That's kind of where we were going with this, was this kind of deep dive into ride quality and how we can affect it. And again, I think, what's critical is when you go to that point and start pushing yourself to understand what makes a better bike in terms of ride quality, you start asking different questions. Questions that might seem obvious if you've just kind of been following along since 1975. But if they start to lose relevancy, then you got to push yourself to do a little bit more work. And that was always a Cervélo thing, was like, first principles of engineering, figure out why, figure out if you can make change, strip it back, get rid of the layers of tradition, and, work back to we got some fixed variables, right? Wheels go in the same place, roughly about a meter apart. There's an extra drive train that like there's some things that are fixed. And inside that, we got to rethink the questions we're asking.
Yeah, of course. Within the UCI rule.
Yeah, of course. And thank God, I know we complain about it endlessly internally, but can you imagine if you were sort of untethered?
It'd be carnage. It'd be absolute carnage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna show you something, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, but this has been, skip over that and jump straight to this. This was kind of what drove a lot of the research we were doing in that era. And this topology analysis we did was an exercise in figuring out what structure was best, for our bikes. And, this obviously comes out in bikes like a P5X or a PX, where we've eliminated seat stays, from the bike. We don't even have a seat tube. But all was in understanding how do you improve stiffness without sacrificing weight or comfort or whatever those variables are that you're trying to manage. We jumped into this really kind of, we deep dived into structure on the bike, and which again, this could be obvious if you don't really think about it. But if you're trying to solve problems you haven't solved before, you got to kind of strip it back to basics. And what we did was basically move the loads around the bike and figure out where they're best carried for the most efficient structure. Those Squoval Max tubes that we came up with, it's kind of a funny thing to wrap your head around, but fundamentally what we were trying to do is come up with a shape that did the work, much like we did with in 2006, but come up with a shape that does the work. And then you kind of form that shape out of the material, as opposed to, like, if you're just trying to use a round tube to do the work you need it to do, carbon fiber is not the best material for that role. So in order to get the stiffness out of it, then you got to have like lots of layers, or you got to make the tube really big, or whatever it is. But if you come up with shape that does the work, then carbon fiber can be used appropriately. And that's what happened in 2006 with Squoval, and that's continued to happen as we've gone farther into this concept of ride quality and how you control it. So, quickly, what we learned from this study was that what we want from a structurally efficient perspective, or from a structural efficiency perspective, is to carry the loads down a spine. So that becomes the down tube and the seat stays. And the reason for that is what you do there structurally is the load cases are best managed. You're supporting the lower bearing of the headset, you're supporting the bottom bracket, and you're supporting the rear wheel. So from a handling perspective, you're ensuring that those things stay in line. When your bike turns, you don't oversteer. We know the top tube is really critical to torsional stiffness in the bike, but not so much bottom bracket stiffness. So you've got lots of support at the lower bearing. You support the bottom bracket with this giant down tube. And then you've got these chain stays that are tied to the BB right thing, but also just structurally really efficient. So again, harking back to imagine what a PX looks like, where you don't have seat stays and a seat tube in it because we didn't need it to be UCI legal.
Yeah.
But those are the same load cases that we need in a road bike, right?
Hence we saw Stefan Kreisvik realizing that he doesn't need a rear stay.
Exactly. That happened, right? And that's about this structure that we're talking about. When the loads are carried efficiently, you don't have to overbuild tubes. So that if we decided to move that structure into the top tube, for example, the load case gets higher, which means we have to overbuild those tubes. And then, as I say, the top tube's critical for torsional stiffness, but it's also really closely tied to the way the vibration moves into the rider, right? So you overbuild that top tube to manage the structural loads. Now you got a bike that's super poundy because it's not an efficient load case. It's not managing the load cases efficiently. So these, be it Caledonia, Aspero, R5s, PX, they're really kind of driven by this functionality, this understanding that if we have tube shapes that do the work, and then we carry those loads, we manage them effectively, which is down tube and chain stays, then we link the parts of the bike that are so critical to ride quality, and then we can manage that stiffness through variations in the other tube sizes and 4F flexibility on the fork, perhaps top tube size, those kind of things come into play. So this is important when we start unpacking what we made changes to this bike, because there was a lot of good in the bike, but there's always room for improvement.
Nice. I've not seen that diagram before. It's really kind of it's really Matrix-esque or something, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And when you look at this, when you look at these, these images side by side, where you see where they were playing with, the variables are like tube shape, but also tube size. And this system works in conjunction with FEA, so the composite guys are using this. You really see these kind of load cases change constantly through the bike, and the more red there is, the worse it is what it comes down to. So you see these, the move into a big top tube, you see those strain levels. You don't see much red, but the down tube gets really under load.
Yeah, of course.
Overbuild all this external structure.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
nice.
Quickly, we did well on this bike. We did get a bunch of Bike of the Year awards for it, and they were all tied to handling. So we were pretty stoked. Like that, at a time in a classic road bike where we're comparing often apples to apples. Is it lighter? Is it stiffer? Lighter, stiffer, lighter, stiffer. And then we come out and we presented this bike and said, look, this was about handling. It actually played out in our favor to do that. We built a really stable platform. So that being said, the new one, how do you make it better? That was the big question. Always we want to make it lighter, and always we want to make it more comfortable. You remember we've discussed the three comforts.
Yeah.
I gave you 4 fingers there.
It's right, we could just lose one of the fingers, it's fine.
Yeah, just edit one out. Better than 2, I suppose.
Yeah.
The comforts that we talk about were obviously vibration management, which is the one I think became a kind of default or de facto comfort a few years ago when everyone started talking about frame comfort or bike comfort. Vibration management, there's lots of different ways to do that. The easiest way is a giant tire. Quite frankly, if you don't want to change the distance between the seat post and the pedals, and you want to maintain a bike that reacts efficiently to pedal input and to steering input loads, then the lowest hanging fruit on that is a big tire and lower pressure, right? We know now about rolling resistance and tire pressure. We don't all need to run 21 millimeter tires at 120 PSI to get the same rolling efficiency. So that's low hanging fruit. But the other ones that we started talking about years ago were, neurological, right? So does it fit? Can you put the right seat on it? Can you put the bars in the right place? Can you adjust the bars? Touch points are critical. Is it comfortable for the rider using it, in terms of neck pain or shoulder pain, or even just making sure you can put the right seat and touch points on it. But the one that's very seldom discussed is psychological comfort, and that's where this kind of concept of bike stability comes out of. Is if the bike is hard to ride, if it handles too quickly or doesn't handle well enough, or it's unstable, then you spend your life terrified of the bike. And some riders that are experienced would never have that. You get used to the bike you ride, but a new rider might find a problem with all of them, if they're not flexible or it's the wrong bike or whatever it is. These are three different versions of comfort, and we try to address all of them in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So, when we're talking about improving the comfort on a bike, it's not just vibration management. We're also talking about these other variables as well, which is, it leads to decisions around independent bar and stem, for example. So you can change them out if you need to. You can put the bars in the right position. Standard saddle clamps, which I know are generally the case in the market, but there've been some moves over the years to build, a unique lightweight saddle clamp and saddle designs and things like that. So lots of opportunity for adjustability to meet the rider needs. Mm. Big enough tire on it. In the case of an Aspero or a Caledonia, can you put a storage bag on it? Those kind of discussions. Mm. So when we came into this project, we talked to the team guys, and again, we don't always talk to team guys about what they wanted of a bike, because if you're talking to a guy like Cav, he wants it like stiffer and stiffer and stiffer and stiffer all the time, which doesn't make a lot of sense for normal people.
Yeah, he's a special breed of person at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same in other sports. I probably, prattled on about this previously, but I always use alpine ski as a really good example, where World Cup downhill skis and bindings are not even available to normal people. Like, we can't even buy them. Mm. They're so stiff, and the spring tensions are so high in the bindings that it would hurt normal people, if something went wrong at the speeds that we ski at. Mm. So in cycling, we got to sell the thing we build. We're not allowed to build unique things for the pros. We have to be able to sell it, which means you've also got to take what they ask for and temper it a little bit, in terms of who's going to use the bike and what the use case is.
Of course.
Yeah. But so the nice thing, though, with this bike was that they said, keep the handling the same, keep the fit the same. It's got a really nice fit protocol that still manages those highly flexible riders who ride a lower position, but can manage riders who do have a few spacers and, need to sit a little higher for whatever reason that is, short arms or lack of flexibility or whatever. Yeah. But again, the target was make it lighter. So as I said, we've come up, then we parked the technology and we figured out how to get the weight out of it. Then we're going to raise it again. So let's get this thing down to 6.8. Let's get it as light as we can possibly get it on the line. But the key is, it's got to be strong enough and stiff enough and fast enough for the pros to ride it, which means it's got to be stiff enough to sprint on, stiff enough to descend properly on, right? Which is tied to that, keep the handling the same. Mm-hmm. We wanted to introduce a little bit more vibration management into the bike. With that much stiffness that we put into that previous R5, you tend to spend a couple of things. And in that project, we made decisions to spend weight. Mm-hmm. Had a point in the project where we came out and said, look, it's 830 grams for the 56. Do we want to take 100 grams out of it, or do we want to keep the stiffness? And because we were really driving this by this idea of stiffness or on handling, we said, leave it there. Let's find out what's possible in terms of handling. Mm. So we left it. So now we're going to try to make it lighter. But at the same time, when you have that much structure in the bike, you're starting to also, you're not managing vibration as well as you might be able to with some other decisions along the way. So what we're hoping for basically was to have a bike that handles the same, fits the same. So a lot of the positive kind of, attributes, but let's advance it by taking some more weight out of it. But we got to keep the stiffness, which was difficult to do, but introduce some more vibration management.
Really cool. I mean, it's just like, how do you advance a very good bike as it is? And that's what's fascinating about it, I find. And as you say here, this slide sums it up really well, describing it as the ultimate grand tour bike. It's something that we've spoken about quite a lot, I guess, internally and externally. It's discussed as Cervélo. The wording of how this bike is described is a bike that climbs, descends, sprints, and allows you to do it again multiple times.
Yeah, and that's the thing when you think about, when amateur athletes, guys like me, whatever, go training, we train long hours, but we don't race 200K a day for 3 weeks. And that's where you really started to see this room for improved vibration management was, at the end of 3 weeks, what does this look like? So this idea that, to build an ultralight bike is one thing. To build an ultralight bike that claims, descends, sprints like a pro bike, but offers, enough vibration management that it's not beating the body up so you can rinse and repeat. That's the key to it, right? Is make this a race bike, even though it's ultralight.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to benefit from that. Right?
Yeah, 100%. There's every pro is going to benefit down to, John Smith, who's riding a Cat 4 Crit at Hillingdon, which is a circuit in London, just for your reference. A not great circuit in London. I'll add that as well. But yeah, it benefits everyone, whether you're doing a grand tour to doing, going for a couple of days riding with your mates in Mallorca or whatever it is.
That's right.
Yeah.
When we roll that all up, and again, it comes down to looking at all the constituents of speed, right? If you focusing on one is not always going to get you the best bike. So there's always this challenge to kind of like trade a few things off here and there, right? So we're going to make trade-offs for things like strength, because it's always super important to Cervélo to never have a field failure. And there's a lot of light bikes that are super light. They're lighter than the one that we've just put on the market. However, they don't meet ISO standards, or they certainly can't lose a seat stay and finish the stage in a mountain. And so you're always forced to make these decisions based on what the goals are and what matters the most to you. So, if we look at it from a project perspective, our goal was to return the R5 to the ultralight category, because it was always our ultralight bike. So let's return it to the ultralight category without sacrificing handling, aero, strength, comfort, and the ability to sprint on it, right? So that is what it comes down to, is making sure that our ultralight bike is indeed used at the top end of the sport.
Very different to some competitors on the market. I'm not going to say any names.
Yeah, there's, as I say, there's lots of beautiful lightweight bikes out on the market right now, but not as many used at the Pro Tour.
Very true.
Yeah, so jumping right into it, quite honestly, this time we came in and we looked at our engineering pillars and we said, first thing first, let's get the weight out of it, and then we're going to look at ride quality. And stiffness rolls into that ride quality story. But again, ride quality is more than just the stiffness of the bike. It's also the handling of the bike. It's the way those things come together so that we experience the world through this set of filters. So, again, get the weight out of it, improve the vibration management, keep the handling, and then figure out how to maintain those handling properties where it's stiff enough for pros to sprint and corner on it, but it's not so stiff that it doesn't make vibration well. And here's how we did right off the start. It's pretty good. We got the frame down to 700 grams. And when we always quote 56 centimeter frames painted with metal parts. That's always our so whether we're talking about Caledonia, we're talking about R5 or P5 or whatever, it's always a 56 painted with metal. So we got 160 grams out of the frame set itself. So lighter frame weight went down 15%, fork went down almost 10%. So we get the weight out of the system. We were aiming for a kilo. We didn't quite get there. We got to 1,030 grams for the frame set.
I mean, what's 30 grams between friends though? Come on. It's nothing. It is literally nothing as well. Like you and I have discussed about frame weights a lot over the last few days.
Yeah.
But there's obviously what are we going to say about it?
I was going to say,
there's obviously like a little bit of a discrepancy that every frame is going to be slightly different. There's a percentage of change in that 700 grams, but the difference in that, even in such a lightweight bike, is grams. It's weight. Yeah. The weight of a battery, if you're talking on the biggest side of things.
That's right. Yeah. What do we decide? A AAA battery is about 15 grams, give or take. So, this is the weight of two AA or AAA batteries. Yeah, you're right. And it's important to kind of call that out, especially as we start getting into this world where we're getting back to the ultralight world. And, there's a lot of people who, some of us go for aero, some of us go for ride quality, some of us go for weight. And there's some beautiful lightweight brands out there that have a massive audience. And this bike will get weighed. And, the caveat is always like 700 grams is our golden sample. It's our average. It's what we're shooting for. But there's variability in all of these things that, plus or minus in terms of weight. And it's not something that, regardless of how good our process is, we can control the way we would like to. Project California, we could. But certainly the way this bike is being built, there's going to be some variability in that frame weight. And when we're talking about a 1,200 gram bike, variability of 25 grams is inconsequential, like it's there. But when you're down in a 700 gram frame, suddenly those, 20 grams here or there starts to look like a lot. Mm-hmm. But it's not, right? It's still just a couple of batteries. But that being said, the way we're building this bike, there's some variability, but it's really tightly controlled. We're thinking we're really only talking plus or minus 30 grams in the largest size of the outmost. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And again, give or take, that's our tolerance window.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, like every brand is the same. Every bike brand's the same. There's unless you're, hand making the frames.
Yeah.
It's just
they're all handmade.
Yeah, but like unless it's like I'm talking like maybe like Bastion, for example, where the tubes are specifically made for the frame, and then you've got the titanium lugs. Like that's the only kind, or in the same sense, like a custom-made steel frame where it is more artisan. That's the only kind of time when you can be maybe that pedantic, but in fact maybe not even like. But mate, you can't obviously necessarily get down to the same weights, but you can be that pedantic about something like weight if you wanted to, while this is still a handmade bike, and there has to be that element of tolerance that goes into it.
That's exactly it. And I think the thing that we forget about, and our composite engineer Scotty will always point this out. He's like, we're not really riding carbon fiber. We're riding carbon fiber reinforced polymers, right? We're riding a plastic. And so what you're talking about, that variation in frame weights, it comes down to resin content that we can't control as well. So a bike like a Project California bike, like in our 5CA or an RCA, the reason you're spot on. The reason we were able to control the weight tolerance in that was because there were so many tiny little plies that were put in exactly the right place. Those bikes, but when you're talking about, a bike that's much higher production, much higher output yield, it's harder to control those variables. The plies are a little bit bigger. They're maybe not in exactly the right place. They're not going to go in exactly the right spot the way they would in an RCA. Therefore, that ply is stretched out a little bit bigger to cover a wider. Those kind of variables come in, and then just resin content in the supplied material that we're using adds up.
Of course. How many RCAs were made in the end?
We did versions of the RCA, and I think it was, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was 250 per run.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is a completely different, completely different kind of bike, isn't it? At the end of the day.
Correct. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you still, still bear in mind, as you said, 15% saving on the frame weight and a 7% saving on the fork is a really big saving by today's standards, really.
Yeah.
As you say, the bike's been a long time in the engineering phase, and to be able to lose that kind of weight into it is pretty damn impressive at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so pretty excited about it. So because, we knew from that first topology study, and as I say, we had that moment in the project where we're like, okay, we're 830. Do we want to spend it or keep it? We decided to spend it. So we actually had a pretty good idea, how we could actually go about approaching the weight reduction. That would also positively impact vibration management. That was about shrinking tube sizes. We had this massive Squoval Max tube. We have that volume we can play with. That's one of the variables when we talk about managing materials. It's not just literally carbon fiber. It's actually tube size and bond joint location and all those kind of things that play into that. But our challenge was, of course, if stiffness is so inextricably woven into ride quality via stiffness via handling, then how do we maintain the handling properties, even though we're going to reduce that stiffness somewhat? So, what we did was we basically moved the stiffness profile around a little bit. We did reduce the stiffness of the frame itself. So that frame moves from being a crazy stiff bike that we had in the past. It now moves down into the same region as some of the previous, like an R3 Mud. It's a little higher than an R3 Mud, the same similar stiffness profile, which is a bike that clearly the pros could sprint on, corner on. I mean, that's our previous generation stiffness profile. It's still very, very good. We just went really extreme with it last time. But what we did to maintain the handling profile is we moved some of that stiffness into the fork itself. And so usually you want to be careful with that, because obviously the fork contributes substantially to vibration management and throughput of vibration into the rider. But because we had managed the frame so much, that fork doesn't have as profound an impact on the rider as it would had we had a really stiff top tube and a really stiff fork, right? So basically that stiffness might be traveling through the fork itself, but it's dissipating in the frame before it gets to the rider. So we've actually ended up bringing out a bike that handles much like the previous generation, but is much more muted ride than we had in that 2017 model itself. The nice thing having a fork that's stiff, if you can do it, is that handling gets really better, much better, because the side-to-side lateral movement on the fork contributes to that oversteer or understeer of a fork. And also the fore-aft stiffness is better for braking. But the problem gets too low because it's also connected to vibration management. If you let that fork get too low fore-aft from a fore-aft vibration perspective, then the brake starts chattering.
Good point.
Right? You get that problem that we saw with early disc brakes and crosslight, where you have that shuddering starting to happen.
It felt horrible as well.
Yeah. So basically, that's kind of what we did in a simple case. Is we just kind of moved some of that stiffness out of the frame and into the fork.
And this photograph is not the new R5.
That is the new R5. Oh no, it's not. You're right. This is showing. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and the biggest giveaway that I mean, we'll come into it. We'll come on to what the differences are, but someone will probably notice it. But it's not the new R5.
It's funny. You were the first person to notice that.
Got the eyes. That's why. Got the eyes. These tiny eyes can see things sometimes.
There's some changes that we made to the frame for aerodynamics and for aesthetic changes. Here's the new one. Here's the old one. Just toggle them back and forth so you can see those frame changes.
It's very subtle.
It's pretty subtle. And what we did was two things. We reduced the volume of the tubes in certain areas, then that brings the weight down. We also lowered the down tube, right? And that was critical. We actually lowered the seat tube junction and lowered the down tube, but the stack height stayed exactly the same. So the stack and reach dimensions are the same, but we've lowered the tubes. So what I mean is it looks like this. The blue one is the, says 2019 here, 2018 R5, and the yellow is the new bike. So they're kind of overlaid on the bottom bracket and the fork ends, and you can see how those yellow tubes are just lower down than the blue ones.
Mm-hmm.
So we just lowered everything.
And that helps a lot with the stability of the bike, and also works great for smaller riders as well.
Yeah. The nice thing is that we give us a chance to lower the standover height again, which is really something, again, there's a bunch of stuff in the background with Cervélo that we don't necessarily talk about all the time. One of them is that we really care about the 4851 ride profiles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a whole discussion around trail and unified trail where, you know, we just our 48 and 51s to ride the same as our 56s. Whereas the challenge in the industry is that a lot of companies don't do that. They build one fork or maybe two fork offsets, and those fork offsets are paired with a head tube angle. But when you get into those 48s and 51s, what happens inevitably is that head tube angle moves from being a 73, for example, back to like a 69. Mm-hmm. And now the fork designed to work with a 73-degree head tube angle is laid out a long way. And the reason we have to lay it out is because the wheels have to go where the wheels have to go. You know, they're, again, about a meter apart, give or take. Mm-hmm. And just shrink that front end of the bike, or you get too much toe clip overlap or toe overlap on this. So the head tube angle does that work. The wheels stay where the wheels go, but we can shorten the reach of the bike by pulling that head tube angle back for those riders that require less reach. So the problem is, once you do that, the trail number goes out the window. It's crazy. You see these massive long trail values on bikes that are smaller sizes. And so the bike oversteers desperately and wants to fall over all the time. So the smallest riders are spending their day trying to keep their bike upright. Whereas you optimized for handling. So in the background, Cervélo has been really concerned about standover heights. So we scale our bottom bracket height. Remember, I think we said earlier, we were talking about the tradition of having a 68 mil bottom bracket drop on every size you make. You know, we scale our bottom brackets. Bottom brackets are lower on smaller bikes for standover reasons. They've got smaller tanks, so might as well give the opportunity for lower standover as well. And we unify the trail. Mm-hmm. So it's all sort of tied into that ride quality story that we're focused on. So here's the two things that we address. We address this area behind the fork crown, and we address the seat tube cluster on the bike. So if we look here, here's what we did. You see that down tube drop, get closer to the wheel. And also we added this chin onto the fork. So we did this for aesthetic reasons, for sure. We made some decisions around tire clearance and aesthetics with that first generation, and we chose to have that down tube a little bit higher off the wheel. But there's some advantages aerodynamically to having the down tube lower or closer to the wheel. So if you've got an P5, it's a great example where we've got that down tube basically shoved right up against the wheel. So what we're trying to do is manage aerodynamics a little bit. The chin itself keeps the flow attached a little bit better when you're coming across that sort of lower bearing location. Mm-hmm. So we want to keep flow attached across that, so you don't have as much detached flow on the down tube. We've made the down tube mass or volume lower, so it's actually a smaller tube. But basically, from an aerodynamics perspective, there's flow that gets dragged up as the wheel rotates. You know, so it's rotating clockwise. So you have flow that's getting pulled up and pushed into the flow that's coming between the crotch of the fork and the top of the tire. Mm-hmm. So you might have areas open, so you've got flow through there, and it's colliding behind the fork crown with flow that's getting dragged up. So you've got this kind of entrained flow. So basically, by lowering that down tube, we're throttling that a little bit. So the idea is to reduce the amount of mess that's behind the fork crown.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah. So it improves the aerodynamics, and looks a lot better than it did previously.
And as you've written here, it is no weight penalty.
0 weight penalty. That's right. Yeah. Think about what's happening that you're trading off fork length for head tube length is really what it comes down to. So it's a wash. The other thing we've done is we've played with the seat tube cluster for a couple of different reasons. It gets lower. Again, upper bearing stays in the same place on the head tube, so the stack and reach are the same on these bikes. They don't change size. But we lowered that seat tube cluster, partially for weight, shorter seat tube, less material, weight comes down again. But also from a vibration management perspective, it means we have more seat posts sticking out per seat tube size, per seat post or seat height. So it just gives us that chance to have a little bit better vibration management, even, a fore aft flex in that post. D-shaped seat post that we did for the R5. It also shows up on the Caledonia 5. And that's a vibration management tool. So by doing that, it lowers the standover height, it reduces the weight, and it improves that vibration management we were talking about in terms of ride quality.
And it looks great. More seat post always looks really cool.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I was blown away. I was genuinely surprised when you sent me that photo of Wout's bike that it was a 54.
I know. Like,
that's a lot of seat post.
I do wonder if it's just an uncut seat post that's out that they've just put in the frame.
But yeah.
But he is a tall guy. He is a tall guy as well. But
yeah, that's right.
I also wonder if it was a bike that he had early in the, the Cervélo Jumbo Visma agreement, where he was kind of working out what fit he wanted as well. Because it just says Wout van Aert's bike. It doesn't tell you what it's been ridden at or anything like that.
Right, fair enough.
So it could have been an early bike that he had, and maybe just thought he was a 54, but actually he's probably a more 56.
I would have thought he was a 56. Anyway, I guess I'll ask that question.
Yeah, he's your height, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like 6 foot, right? 6'1".
Yeah, so he's to be riding a 54. That's sure. I mean, I know a lot of pros do often ride smaller bikes, but surely he should be a 56.
Yeah, one would think 130 stem on it, slammed.
Yeah, I mean, it looked great.
He's been working on his flexibility, apparently.
Yeah, lots of time in the gym there and doing yoga, I reckon.
So classic core race geometry. This is the same handling geometry we had on the previous generation. 73-degree head tube angle, 410 chainstay. The difference, we're reporting the trail as 57.5 on this bike, but that's with a 28. We've kind of just updated everything to be based on 28 mil tires. So with a 25 mil tire, we're back at that 57, which is exactly the same as what we had previously. Some slight changes is that we've scaled the bottom bracket again, just a little bit lower in some places for those sort of 48s and 51s. Again, driving stability through rider center of gravity, but also improving standover height.
Nice, really nice.
Yeah. Here's what this looks like. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically you see in that size 48, for example, the standover height comes down 6 millimeters.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's not the same on every bike. It was based on some decisions, but in some places there's big improvements, in other places a little bit less. But basically, we scale that whole thing.
Nice, cool.
And we've got this nice integrated top cap design. So again, the key with this is like when you're building a bike, it can't just fit the riders who ride the lowest. It's also got to fit the riders who do need some spacers as well. So there's 2 integrated top caps available. There's a 50 or 7 mil, which is the traditional. Anytime you see a carbon top cap, that's flat. It's about 7 mil, give or take. And then we have one which is 22 mil, so it's at 7 plus 15, so 7 plus a spacer and a half. So pretty. You see that a lot. Like that's a pretty traditional setup for these bikes. But you can put 30 mil of spacers beneath the stem. So you can get that bar stack to 52 mil if you need to. So pretty broad range. And those spacers are all 2-piece. So you have that opportunity to kind of adjust on the fly if you need to. If you get lower as the season goes on, or you're swapping out for a crit versus a road, whatever it is, you have that opportunity to change those quite easily.
Yeah, they're super easy to remove. They basically like interlock into each other from the same setup that's on the Aspero 5, and I've dismantled it. several times for the fun of it,
Exactly.
because it's interesting. And it's basically like an interlocking two-side spacer that just interlock into each other. The only time it's a slight fiddle is when you're trying to hold it all in place, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, that's perfect, now it works. But it's a really well designed front end, and what's quite nice is it does follow the lines of the bike quite nicely as well. You know, with the new stems as well.
Yeah, that's Jonathan Strack. He's got a nice eye for integration with that stuff. He's great at building those little puzzle pieces that kind of fit together and tidy things up.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah. Bike's got 42 mil of tire clearance now, so it's got the same amount of tire clearance as a Caledonia. So that means you've got room for 34 millimeter tire and still meet ISO standard. And the ISO standard is 4 millimeters per side. For us to sell a bike, you got to have 4 mil per side between the frame and the tire. So 34 millimeters still passes. That's a huge tire.
That's a huge. I mean, that it's almost putting a cyclocross tire on it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you wouldn't ride it unless it was a very dry cross race or something like that. But you could effectively fit a cyclocross tire in it.
Yeah, I'm sure people will. I know people have been running 33s on 33 cross tires on Caledonias, so I know it's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, the reason we're reporting space, just to tie to that, because you and I have talked about tires endlessly over the last 6 or 8 months. There's so many different tires and tire manufacturers, and for all the arguments against ETRO or ERTO or ETRO, there's so little control over the size variables now. The rims are wider, but they're not all the same width. The tires are growing and shrinking, and different casings are different sizes. So
that's why consistency. There's literally no consistency between wheel brands and tire brands, and
exactly.
Providing the actual width that's available, allows people to then go and measure their tire and their what on whatever wheel it is set up, and that's kind of, I think, is a much easier way to be able to work it, because the amount of times I've looked at a tire and it says it's a 28 and actually it measures a 30. That seems to be the common one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly. And so we've sort of encouraged people to take the measurements. It's put it on the rim, blow it up, measure the width. And if you really are worried about it, because in some cases you might be pushing the width on, okay, I got a couple of millimeters per side, maybe that's okay. You got to check the rollout as well to make sure you got that room for rollout. So that's just a matter of measuring the chainstay length, from the inside of the crotch on the bottom out to the chain, and then you can figure that out. It's a little bit more effort than it's worth, but this is the stuff that we've sacrificed getting away from convention, right? When people are saying, screw it, I want wider rims for aerodynamics, or to allow that tire to open up for better, whatever it is. These are the prices we pay. And I'm sure in a couple of years, we'll have a much better database that we'll just be able to look it up. But at this point, if you're questioning it at all, just measure it.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously we concealed the hoses. It's low-hanging fruit for aerodynamic advantage. We knew that a long time ago. We used to use ICS4, which was also a super aero place to put the cables in, where they would put the top of the stem and tuck in the back. Really, very fast, but we had brake hoses hanging out on this one. So this time we took the opportunity to tuck them inside.
Nice.
Yeah, and we just used that.
The little Di2 cable that came in the top. So many people my R5, 2017 R5, I've run that Di2 cable in the frame with the rear brake hose.
Yeah.
Because it's just
you just tuck it in that little connector.
Yeah.
We're using the same steer tube and stem style that we used on Caledonia 5 and Aspero 5. So it's that C-shaped steerer that allows the brake hoses to kind of run through the body of the stem and then fall into the system through the center of the bearing, and then they're free.
What's so important to highlight about this that I've found as well, when a lot of other brands have done integrating all the cables, is it sometimes limits the steering. This does not limit the steering at all.
Yeah, that's what we wanted, and you're right, and we understand that there's some challenges with going through the center of the bearing. You don't get steering input from the hoses, and you're not restricted by how far you can turn, right? So that, you've also got access to a lot of slack inside the system. Once it clears that bearing, it's free, which gives you a chance to have a little bit more hose in there, which makes it easier to pull the stem off if you're packing it or working on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a super smart design. It's really, really clean. It works really well. Really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah, so 2 stems available. There's an alloy one and a carbon one. It ships obviously with the carbon one, which is that ST31 stem, which is the same one that comes in Caledonia 5. It changes to ST31 LT. So with the Fusion, it's just a running change. We just made it lighter. You know, we're looking at the whole system weight, not just the frame and fork. So we also took some weight out of the stem as well.
Nice, really cool.
You know, here we are testing the R5.
Hey, there's our man.
There he is, Foam Dave. Look at him, he got tidied up for this photo too. He's usually
someone gave him a bit of a clean.
Yeah, it's probably a whole lot of Bondo and a fresh coat of paint. You know, and I'm always sort of compelled to point out the testing protocol here, because it's something that's open, and it's one of the things that I fundamentally believe the reason Cervélo continues to find aero gains is the consistency in the data that we're chasing. You know, so Foam Dave is sitting in this bike on exactly the same position in both bikes. He sits in that same position on every bike we test, whether it's competitor bikes, whether it's a TT bike, a Caledonia, whatever. The bikes are set up exactly the same. They've got the same set of wheels on them. They've got the same cranks on them. They've got the same derailleurs and drive systems. So what we're measuring in this case is the product that we just developed, which in this case is stem, frame, fork, seat post, against the old equivalents. And this we are able to benchmark because we're not looking at a difference in a rider position or in the components. We're not measuring wheels in this case. And we did well. We saved an additional 2.5 watts drag overall. And that's, when I say overall, it means we're testing from 15 to -15. We test at 40K an hour with a rider on it. Now, the consensus in the industry is that we don't actually ever really see 15 to 15. So a lot of the other brands who are legitimately concerned about chasing aero gains will mention the real world is 9 to 9 on average. Others say 11 to 11. So basically, if we look under that curve, we're like a little bit closer to 3.5, 4 watts saved, which is actually, even better. So if that's the case, and we go with those averages, we managed to save quite a bit. And that's a result of that reduction in tube size, concealing the cables, and the addition of that chin.
And that is something to say, is to be saving 2.5 watts, let alone 3.5 watts in the current era of bikes is bonkers, because we've been at a point where it's been like 0.5 watt here, even less than 0.5 watt here or there, not 2.5 watts, not 3.5 watts, and it's been at that for quite a few years now. So that's
getting harder and harder and harder to find gains.
It's getting a lot harder, and to find something that is 2.5 watts over a plus or minus 15 degree yaw angle is huge.
Yeah, that's right.
Even if you, as you say, if you negate the fact that 15 plus or minus 15 isn't necessarily what's deemed as something that happens in the real world very often at all, which it pretty much doesn't ever happen, and you look closer to that 10 degree plus or minus angle, like it's still a massive gain. Yeah, it's great. And as I say, I mean, we had that opportunity with this bike, because we've been testing it, and then we had the opportunity to make those changes, which are better for drag reduction, right? Had we kept those tubes the same size, we probably wouldn't see these gains. So this stuff's all rolled up together for sure. Yeah.
There's a couple of component updates that come along with this, and it's worth chatting about just because they're really running changes. So if people have been following along, or with what's happening, these aren't radical changes, but they're improvements. Again, they're sort of evolutions of of what we've done previously that arrive with this platform, but will spill out into our other, into Caledonia 5s and bikes like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
The first is the handlebar. It used to be called an AB09, and it was the bar that we initially developed to go on the S3, and then it has lived on the Caledonia 5 and on the previous R series bikes. It's now called the HB13, and all it is a change from about 300 grams to 260. So we took a bunch of weight out of the bar.
Great shaped handlebar. This is
great shaped handlebar. So it's still that 80-123 drop. Designed 0 to 5 degrees so that the bar is usable. It's got a nice flat transition off the top, so the hood sits, in sort of a contemporary position. Yeah, it's a lovely, simple shape that is usable.
And the Aspero 5, has effectively the same bar but flared.
But flared and some sweep. That's right.
Yeah, and that is probably the most comfortable handlebar I've ever used. It's great. Really am a big fan of this bar because for me as a rider, I sit on the tops. I very often will ride with my hands on the tops just because I find it comfortable. And because of the way that the bar is angled, it's incredibly comfortable to do that. You're not feeling like your wrist is in an awkward position or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, we're deeply handlebar nerds, right? And you either are art is what it turns out. But we put a lot of thought into these bars, and a lot of the evolution that happened came from the first handlebar we did, which was the ABO4, which was a really deep core aero bar that we did for the S5 when we revved it in 2016 or 2014. And a couple of things to think about, we were using a lot of 3T Ergonova bars, which were very popular at the time. Mm-hmm. And I apologize if we've sort of talked about this before, but quickly, it was something that I noticed that people were rolling that handlebar way. The trend towards having a nice smooth transition under the hood was dictating that bar would get rolled. So people would take the drop and they'd basically roll the handlebar up and then push the hoods down until they got a nice transition off the top. The challenge with that was that usually you couldn't really use the drop of the bar at all. Like you might as well just cut it off. It was a funny angle. It kind of pointed towards the ground, but from a safety perspective, because the Ergonova had this kind of 45-degree part for your wrist to sit on it below the hood, it positioned it in such a way that you couldn't reach the lever blade from the drops at all. Like it was just, I couldn't. Lots of people, you'd have to have huge hands.
I couldn't. I had a set of them on an old bike, and they were terrible trying to reach the levers on the drops, but they were aero. Yeah. They were really aero. That was about.
It was a nice, yeah, it was a really popular contemporary bar at the time. But it was a bar that was not great for sprinting on, and if you put that bar in that position, you added 2 centimeters to the reach.
Yep.
And you couldn't use the drops. So it was just inappropriate for use case. Is what happened. So when we went into designing the ABO4, we looked at the way a bar needs to be positioned based on contemporary hood positions. So we made that nice smooth transition. We knew we wanted we used to call it a working curve, so you could actually get up under it, sprint on it. So a little curve, and you could reach the brake levers you could reach the lever blades from the drops. And then we put this long tail on it that you could slice off if you didn't like it. So if you sat on the drops, you sat kind of way out on the end and had a little bit of flex in it, So it was a bar that we really thought about that drop shape, borrowing certainly influenced by those semi-compact drops that were becoming the norm from guys like FSA or from the Trek bar. They did a really nice job. But then from the top, what we did was we thought a lot about the aerodynamics of the bar, but also where that airfoil is positioned. Mm-hmm. We wrote a lot of competitor bars and found that those bars that located the airfoil behind the center line of the bar, you would often end up impacting your wrists on them. Mm-hmm. Right? Cut away really far, so it wasn't in the way, but it was definitely a concern. And then the bars that moved the airfoil, the leading edge of the airfoil in front of the center line of the bar, they often sloped them out. So they started at the stem land and they grew, in an outward angle towards the extension of the bar itself. And the challenge, we thought a lot about that. It makes sense from an aero perspective. But what it meant is if you did sit on the tops, like you were just talking about, and you rotate your hands out to sit on that, it pops your elbows out.
Yep.
Your handlebars aero, maybe your body's not, because it's hard to have your arms, your hands turned outwards and your elbows turned inwards. So we just rotated that so that that slope came down from the land towards the perch. And that way you can keep your elbows into your side while you ride on it. And it's be more comfortable from the way our hands are oriented on our arms.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you know, we thought a lot about it. We thought a lot about comfort, and we thought a lot about functionality on this bar.
We're all handlebar geeks, basically. You and I are just handlebar geeks. We've known about it for way too long.
Yeah, so anyway, so HB13 replaces the ABO9. It just gets lighter, basically, is what happens.
Nice.
And here's the LT version of that stem that's in the market. All we really did was we hacked about 15 grams out of it by changing the faceplate. So we had just a slot in it before that fit really nicely with our adapter or with some of the aftermarket ones for the accessory mounts. Now we just made the hole way bigger and made a plug that fits in there. And these mounts are modular. You can run just a Wahoo, or you can just run the computer Wahoo or Garmin puck, or you can add the kind of GoPro load style mounts to the bottom of it as well for lights or for cameras or for whatever tickles your fancy.
Nice.
Yeah. And there's a couple of new seat posts. This is something that comes up constantly in fitting and in bike development, and how are people sitting on bikes and what are saddles doing to things. So we've traditionally had a 0 offset and a 25 mil offset, which is super conventional in these D-shaped posts. They were 350 mil long. This generation, we've updated to a new seat post that is 100% compatible with the previous one. So if you do want the 25 mil setback, it is still available. Make them longer, they go to 400 mil. And we have a 0 setback, obviously, and we have a 15 mil setback. Right. So just, we see a lot of saddles now at the front end, or I guess it'd be the back of the rails. So pushed, much farther forward than the old days when we would sit in the middle of the rails. So it makes sense to kind of bring those riders that saddle position a little bit forward and support it.
And that's caused just by the change in saddle design that's starting to become more popular with the shorter nose saddles, isn't it?
Well, this is a really interesting conversation because I've been on the road recently, and I've been asking fitters about this, and there seems to be multiple opinions about why it's happening. The shorter saddles appear to have an impact on this. For whatever reason, just the way the rails are oriented or where we're sitting on those seats. Some theory is that we're chasing our handlebars, post, that fit a few years ago where everyone was rolling their body position really far forward, and the hands were going down and out. There might be some aspect of that, like we're not sitting as far back as we used to because we're all riding lower bars. Then there's also the discussion about opening the hip angle up, but that doesn't seem to be tied directly to seat post offset. That there's more to body change. So whatever it is that's driving it, it's legit. Right? And there seems to be more use of 0 offset posts, and less use of 25 mil setback positions.
Yeah, it's fair enough.
Yeah. And then we finally moved away from the bond-in style compression plug that has been such a traditional Cervélo go-to. And the reason we did that, to be clear, is fork reinforcement. We had a field failure on a fork years ago that passed all CPSC testing, which was the standard at the time, but it still failed in the field. So that bond-in system that we used, the idea was to get reinforcement behind and below the split ring on the bike. Because that's where a fork breaks most of the time. That split ring basically cuts a hole in there, cuts a line in the steer tube, and then they fail at the split ring. So our idea was to reinforce that area with a bond-in system that was much lighter than a longer removable system. But, the reality is, now that the cables are running internally and the hoses are running internally, it makes more sense for fitting and for customization to have a system that you can remove easily, right? So there is weight, but the convenience far outweighs the negative impacts of weight.
Mm-hmm.
And all these bikes ship with this new Reserve wheel. This is kind of cool. Reserve, if you don't know much about them, is obviously a wheel brand that was associated with Santa Cruz mountain bike. They became famous for the images of our Scottish trials friend. His name is just
Danny McCaskill.
Danny McCaskill, thank you. Trying his damnedest to break one. And Reserve hung their hat on no missed rides as a kind of warranty claim. Like if you break one, they'll get you a new wheel. It's no problem at all. But they engineer for quality. Like that's a big part of their story. So when they got into the road market, they wanted to carry that same warranty with them. When we got involved in Reserve, it meant that we could start working with some of the shapes that we've been designing for years. We've been looking at wheels, but we don't know how to make wheels. But obviously we know that wheel aerodynamics is profoundly important to the speed of a bike. So we had been sort of deep diving into wheel shapes. So there's a new line of wheels coming out through Reserve over the next little while that will reflect a lot of those shapes that Cervélo collaborated with Reserve on. Mm-hmm. So the Reserve quality, they're super light. They're 1320 for a pair with a 240 hub in them. And then there's sort of an asymmetrical system. So worried about wheel performance from a stability perspective. They're a lower, wider front wheel and a taller rear wheel, I believe is the way it works. So yeah, 34, 37 is what they are. So these are pretty exciting because they're nice, lightweight, all-purpose wheel that comes with a lightweight bike.
It's perfect, isn't it? Like lightweight bikes need lightweight wheels. I'm quite a firm believer on that. I just think it looks better.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you've not seen this video of Danny McCaskill breaking a Reserve wheel, just go and hunt for it on YouTube. It's amazing. It's so good.
Yeah, it really is.
He is challenged to break it, and I'm not going to say what happened, but yeah, just go and watch it. If you just search for Danny McCaskill Reserve wheel, something will come up, and it's a really, really good little video with him really testing a wheel to the limits, shall we say.
And let's face it, it's never a bad day when you get to watch a Danny McCaskill video.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
He is the right guy for the job. Like it's just fun, always fun. And that video is just him. They just let him loose.
Yeah, it's just like put him on play and let him go.
Yeah, it's well worth a watch.
Yeah. Anyway.
So like that's the tech. Now, the model line itself is quite tight. It's pretty clean. There's a couple of different versions. The first one is this 5 black. We call it 5 black because it's kind of our lightest graphic. It's basically clear over carbon. The mold quality on these bikes is high enough that we really just need to clear them, and they don't require paint to kind of cover over bond joints or anything like that. This all the usual suspects here, right? Dura-Ace, Red, Force, Integrity I2. Obviously, with Shimano's recent release of Dura-Ace and Ultegra and the situation we're in globally with supply, these bikes are not all going to ship at the same time, unfortunately. So I think the first ones in market are the Force bikes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we launched, and then things will flow as they flow, they say. It's also available as a frame set though. So it's a frame module. It does come frame fork, stem bar, seat post. So you can kind of build up. So if you do want to build up a custom bike with this, frame sets are available now.
Mm.
The second colorway, which tends to be the favorite of most people, is this lime and black. This is using that same lime shimmer color that we used on the Aspero 5s. Just kind of highlight that transition off the down tube or off the top tube into the seat stays itself.
And that transition, which is from the top tube into the seat stays, is just a beautiful line. And bringing that lime shimmer color into it really, as you say, highlights that point.
Yeah, that's right.
What I like about this color as well is the black doesn't actually look that black from photos. It's got a kind of a almost like slatiness to it as well.
Yeah,
It's really
that's
beautiful.
right.
Really beautiful.
Yeah, it's a very elegant paint job.
Yeah.
So built, this one is available as an Altegro bike or a force bike or a frame module as well. So again, you can get this bike as a frame set if you want.
Nice.
Yeah, and then for the fans, we also offer this Jumbo replica frame set. I always point out that, for those who haven't actually kind of pulled it up online and had a good look at it, emphasize the fact that this is not just a black bike with a yellow fork. It's actually got this ghosted honeycomb in it.
Yeah.
It's really sexy when you see them up close. So this we introduced with Jumbo last year in the previous R5 and the S5, and it's been very popular because when you see it in real life, it's a very different bike than it looks here on the screen.
Yeah, the photographs that you see of it don't do it justice because the additional detail, as you say, the honeycomb that runs through the black is stunning, really stunning.
Yeah.
Lovely little touch.
Yeah, so that's it. That's our trip through the R5.
Amazing. I think, as usual, Phil, you've absolutely hit it out of the park.
Well, it's fun to talk about these things.
Yeah, it's it's a very beautiful bike that has, it was an evolution, not a revolution, I think was one of the phrases that you said to me a long time. And it is a very great, it's a very lovely and well thought through execution of an already fantastic bike to make it even better. And
what's really sort of unique, sorry, cut you off, unique about this bike too is the chance to talk about it and its proven pedigree, before it actually hits the market, right?
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's quite nice, and like, especially what was so nice when it was first kind of leaked out there at Fleshwell and some of the other early season races. And I'm going to say this because I've got one, is that the colorway that it was leaked in, everyone was like, what the hell is that? And it that's one way to leak a bike, isn't it? Is leak it with a very bold colorway.
Yeah.
And it's a very intentional leak to catch attention. And it did exactly that. And a lot of people wanted to know what was going on. There's a lot of speculation. Is it a new R5? Is it something completely different? Who knows? Is it going to be called an R5? Is it going to be called an R6? Who knows? Like, there was a lot of stuff going on about that, which I was seeing, in the journalist things on like cycling tips and stuff, which was great. It's great there was a discussion. And then seeing it doing as well as it did do at, the Grand Tours and at some of the one-day races really, as you say, gives the bike a lot of pedigree about actually being out there, which is fantastic.
Yeah, one of the nice things about it too is that Jumbo, if you watch them, they're so scientific that they choose whatever bike they feel they need for that stage or for that race. So you see, not just Wout transition in and out of an R5 and an S5 and a Caledonia 5, but also Roglic and all the other team. The members we don't dictate which bike they ride. So we see them starting to use the entire fleet or the entire model line based on what the requirements are.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's really cool.
Caledonia 5s at E3 and at Strada Bianchi, and then you watch the Grand Tours and they're constantly moving in and out of different bikes.
And I've already seen photos that were posted out today of like Marianne Vos and Wout and Mike Turnerson on Caledonia 5s for Roubaix.
Right. Exactly.
So, it's a bike for Roubaix at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was always our plan was, the sort of getting back to the thing about Cervélo, always wanting to build something that was usable at the high end of the sport, at the top end of the sport. That Caledonia, when we were designing it, the discussion was, what is the difference between the bike you would use at something like Roubaix and a bike you wanted to spend all day riding? They suddenly start to look very, very similar. The bike was designed with Roubaix in mind. That's why we made it UCI legal.
Exactly. We maybe we'll talk about that bike another time on a 011 podcast, because I think especially let's see how this weekend goes at Roubaix.
Yeah, okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah. If it goes well, we'll definitely do a discussion about it.
Okay. I'd look forward to it.
Yeah, as always, Phil, and I'm always incredibly thankful for your time. Thank you for running through another awesome bike. I genuinely can't wait to get mine built up. I'm waiting for some components, which I'm not going to say what they are because I think people could guess what it is, but they are due at some point in October. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I keep looking at the frame thinking, my God, that bike, it's a smart looking bike.
Right.
Yeah, as always, thank you so much for your time and talking through another incredible bike with us. And
well, it's fun.
Yeah, I'm sure
Thanks.
we'll catch up again at another point.
Well, I look forward to it. It's always fun just sitting chatting with bikes.
Yeah, nice one. Thank you.
All right.